I'm Sharon, and I'm going to show you today how to make a homemade pasta with no yeast and no bread machine, and it's just going to be awesome. I'd like to show you a picture of my bowl and explain how easy this recipe is. Okay, there we are. Okay. Not that easy. This is my first video on this. But there we go, there's my bowl. This recipe has an easy recipe, as I say, 1 cup of flour, and I'll explain the flour a little later, 1 beaten egg, there we go, 1 teaspoon of extra virgin olive oil, here we are, 1 pinch of salt, and I'm going to use fine sea salt. You don't have to put the salt in, but I think it just makes it a little bit nicer. I'm going to mix that all together. Now I always have a little bit of water on hand if it's getting too dry, but use it very sparingly, only when you need it. And I'll explain the consistency of the dough. It's important, but it's not difficult to get. There we are. It's starting to clump together. Now I start this in a bowl because it's a little messy on the table. But I'm going to move over to the board shortly. If you were in Italy, you'd probably start on the board, but I try to limit. I make enough of a mess as it is. Okay, so there we go. So we're starting, and I can see now you can add 4 or even 5 tablespoons of water. It depends on your consistency because, of course, sometimes your egg's a little smaller. There are different, or maybe you put a little extra flour in your 1 cup container. Okay, so there we go. So I think it's really clumping nicely now. I'm gonna go to the hands. Of course, they're clean. And we see how it starts to clump so nicely. Now, if you're doing this properly, it'll probably take you about 3 or 4 minutes to knead this dough, just until it's mixed. You don't have to overdo it. And I do it with the heel of my palm, sorry. And if it's getting really dry on the bottom, and it's not picking up that easily, I'll add a bit more water. There we go. And again, if it's too much, add a little bit more flour. Now just like to talk to you a little bit about the flour while we're doing this, okay? So the flour I'm using is extra fine unbleached flour. I'll show you the package. In this case, it's called 00, and sometimes it's called XXX. It's super fine. You can usually find it in an Italian store. You don't have to use that flour, but I feel it's nicer. Now this recipe came to me from northern Italy. My husband and I went to a cooking course there last year, and I just had to bring this recipe back for you because it's so awesome. And you can have fresh pasta at any time because this recipe can be kept in the fridge, in the freezer, and there's just so much you can do with it. Now, if you're from southern Italy, you would probably use half of this white unbleached flour and half semolina, or even in some cases, perhaps all of semolina. It just depends on your taste. But I find it just turns out great the way it is. And there's so many different things you can do with this Pappardelle, and I'll go into that later, but my dough is coming together. It just feels so good. And I'm going to explain exactly how you'll know when it's ready, okay? So here we go. And my holder here is not doing the best job possible, but okay, so you can see that it's coming really, really nicely. It's not tacky. If it starts to get tacky, you might need just a small amount more flour, but it's just feeling right at the moment. Really nice. Now once it's put together, we're going to put a piece of plastic wrap over it and let it rest in the fridge for an hour before we cut our noodles out. And it's a nice process how to cut the noodles out. It's not difficult at all. It's just it's a technique that I got over in Italy, and it'll make your life easier. You will not need one of those pasta machines. Of course, if you feel like using it, go ahead. And on my recipe, aside from this hand-done method, I also have a mixer, a bread mixer method. But I think, as you can see, it's not really necessary. It's great. Okay, so there we go. Looks really good. Nice little round ball. Make sure we got it all in there. And I'm going to let that rest. And, you know, if I was having a dinner tonight, which actually I will be using this tonight, I would just pull it out of the fridge and make my noodles at the last second, because as I'll show you, it's not difficult. So there we go. There's our plastic wrap. And a nice tidy little ball. And again, if this was something I was saving for later, I would just put that in the freezer just the way it is.